Lawyers of Reddit, what's the most laughable, I am not a lawyer but claim you've ever heard? Story 1. Sovereign citizen claims court has no power over her. When I was a judicial intern, I saw an arraignment where the defendant claimed the court had no power over her because she was a sovereign citizen who did not recognize the federal or state governments. Later learned that her sole source of income was Social Security. Story 2. Common law marriage misconceptions. I'm a lawyer in the U.S., and for some reason people are obsessed with common law marriage. I see people on Reddit and even hear them in real life warning other people about how, you've lived with her for more than X years, you're common law married so you have to take that into account. Or, well, we've been living in the same apartment together for X years so we're common law married now. Common law marriage is only a thing that can be done in a small handful of U.S. states now, and there are requirements to it. You have to hold yourself out as being married, live together, present yourselves to the world as being married, etc. You're not going to wake up one day and accidentally be, quote, common law married. Edit to add. Guys, I never claim to be talking about the law in Canada or Australia. I'm aware that it's different in those places. Story 3. Defendant demands Mr. or Mrs. Commonwealth testify. I once saw a defendant argue for a not guilty verdict because there was no Mr. or Mrs. Commonwealth who testified. Obviously, the charges were Commonwealth v. defendant. He doesn't understand that. He was found guilty. The judge did not appreciate that. Story 4. Facebook posts declaring consent limits. As a lawyer, I love seeing all of the Facebook posts telling Facebook what they do and do not consent to. It's the online equivalent of Michael Scott declaring bankruptcy. Story 5. Redditors obsess over incorrect assault definitions. I've found that Redditors are absolutely obsessed with correcting each other, with the idea that assault and battery are often confused, and that assault only ever means to put someone in fear of imminent harm. To the point where, if I even point out that that is only true sometimes, in some places, I will be downvoted. Roughly a third of states define assault as some version of purposely, knowingly, or recklessly causes bodily injury to another. Story 6. Poster claimed you can shoot to harm any home invader. My favorite was on advice for home invasion. According to the poster, you could shoot to harm anyone who comes in uninvited. Absolutely not the case, because self-defense by definition requires reasonable force. It's more lenient in some states and even more lenient in rural areas, but it's just irresponsible to spread this kind of misinformation. Edit. For anyone saying anything along the lines of, nuh-uh, you can always use lethal force if __, or, nuh-uh, in this state, no, that's not what the law says. Anywhere. Reasonable force is an intentionally vague concept, and it's always interpreted case by case. Just because the defendant felt threatened doesn't mean a majority of the jury in his case would, even if this is usually the case. Stand your ground laws, castle doctrine. They exist to support defensive use of force, but you're always bound by reasonable force. And oftentimes, reasonable force can be lethal, but the judge and jury are the people who will decide whether or not you are justified. A group of people who may not share your same views put themselves in your shoes and decide if you did the right thing. The jury decides. Not you. Not your sheriff. Not your concealed carry weapon instructor. If you're on trial for the use of force for self-defense, you absolutely shouldn't feel smug about it. The law has an unpleasant habit of surprising everyone. Stop making blanket statements about the law. If the law was black and white, we wouldn't need attorneys at all. Story 7. Non-lawyer claimed testimony isn't evidence. I had a non-lawyer try to tell me that testimony was not reliable evidence, and that a judge could not rely upon it in making a factual determination. This was in the context of a small claims case I was helping my client prepare for. It was my client's word against the opposing parties, plus some photographs he was planning on introducing. I told the opposing party that, I'll guess we'll see what the judge does. Spoiler, The judge found my client's testimony much more compelling and ruled in his favor. Story 8. Guy claimed he could self-represent after playing Phoenix Wright. Guy claimed he could lawyer himself because he played Phoenix Wright ace attorney. Story 9. Stalker claimed children were his via stolen biological material. This wasn't online, but a guy was representing himself pro se against a client of the legal clinic I worked at the time. She had a semi-public job doing promotion for a local pro sports team. Some dude did a brief fan interview with her at a game, and that lone interaction sparked a 5-year stalking saga, during which she got married and had kids with someone else, that culminated in the stalker making the following claim. He wanted a paternity test for her children, because he was convinced she had paid someone to follow him, find out when he was intimate with himself, break into his home, steal the biological material and deliver it back to her. Apparently she had then used this to become pregnant, and her 2 small children were actually his. I've never seen a judge looked as shocked, or as tired, as I did on the day that motion for paternity was denied. Story 10. Sovereign citizens claimed U.S. is a corporation under sea law. The sovereign citizen stuff is my favorite. The United States is a corporation, and the law of the seas applies. Just look at the fringe on that flag. I do not consent to jurisdiction. Story 11. Undercover cop sarcasm fooled substance dealers. My favorite is, if you ask an undercover officer if he is a police officer, he can't legally lie to you. Yes. Yes, he can. Had an undercover in on a deposition once, and he had been wearing a wire for part of the investigation. He was asked if he was undercover by a co-defendant, and his response was, "Yay, obviously, I'm here buying substances from you guys, 'cause I'm an undercover police officer. I have a wire hidden under my beard and everything, you complete moron." He said it with such immense sarcasm they didn't think twice about it, and sold him a trafficking amount of cocaine. Story 12. Freemason conspiracy invalidates judge's ruling. My favorite. The judge cannot determine this matter because he is a member of the Freemasons, and the Freemasons do not believe in the concept of private property. This case ended with the non-lawyer accusing everyone of being a Freemason. The same non-lawyer also ran an appeal in that case based on the fact that the judge was not a real judge, because the judge had not taken his oath of office. The non-lawyer had dug up a transcript of the judge's swearing-in ceremony which read, "Judge Johnson takes oath of office," when the judge took his oath, instead of the actual words of the oath. The non-lawyer referred to outdated and repealed laws from 1730, which said all oaths had to be transcribed word for word, as a basis for the fact that the judge was not a real judge. If his interpretation was correct, I think no current judge in Australia is a real judge. Story 13. Power of attorney invalidated by removing staples. One of my clients was told by someone on the staff of the nursing home where her mother lives that if an enduring power of attorney, basically a power of attorney made in contemplation of future mental incapacity, that unlike most powers of attorney does not become invalid if the donor becomes incapacitated, is voided if the original staples that held the pages together are removed. I can see a tiny grain of truth to this, in that if the validity of the document was contested, the fact that it had been taken apart and stapled together again might be some evidence to support that, but there is no way that evidence alone would determine the issue. And don't even get me started about people who use the term hearsay but don't know what it means. This has become an epidemic. Story 14. Claim there is no adversarial system in common law. I once had a person claim that within there was no such thing as the adversarial system, and that we were just trying to inflame a contested divorce. Should mention we live in a common law system and both parties had retained separate counsel. Story 15. Reddit's bad advice on landlord-tenant disputes. I work a lot in real estate law, and I generally enjoy reading anything that comes up related to landlord-tenant laws. Generally speaking, Reddit loves to jump on the illegal and don't pay bandwagon. These are terrible pieces of advice. I have seen plenty of people recommend solutions that would likely result in eviction. I usually hop in, Politely inform the poster that laws vary from state to state and that original posters should review local landlord/tenant laws. Story 16. Misinterpreting leases and mitigate damages clause. I'm in real estate. Over the last year or two, I've seen a lot of people try to quote the law as if they are lawyers. No, person, misinterpreting your lease contract and the law supporting it does not mean you get to do whatever you want. Mitigate damages is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Story 17. Armchair experts on NFL's Deflategate scandal. Absolutely the best. I am not a lawyer. Arguments I saw on Reddit came during the Deflategate scandal in the NFL. For those who do not know, a superstar quarterback for the very successful New England Patriots was found to have deflated footballs in violation of league rules. Story 18. Misunderstandings of fair use and copyright. Am, legally but I quit, a corporate lawyer. Basically, no one understands fair use and copyright. I keep seeing people analyzing songs and art and calling everything plagiarism and copyright infringement. I'm not talking songs, but stuff like chord progressions or character names. Just because something exists within a work doesn't make it the author's exclusive property. Story 19. Confusing patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Nearly every time patents come up on Reddit, people say something very wrong. Most commonly confusing patents, trademarks, and copyrights. But Reddit is very anti-patent in general, so people hate on them for all sorts of misinformed reasons. Even most lawyers know very little about patent law, because it is very niche and not a topic on any state bar that I'm aware of. Story 20. Claim filming public freakouts is always illegal. I browse the public freakout subreddit a lot, and it never fails to make me laugh when people are being filmed throwing a tantrum and they start screaming about how it's illegal and they are going to call up their lawyer and sue them. Makes me think of this video from Wonder Chosen. Story 21. Incomplete 14th Amendment dismissal claim. I demand this case be dismissed pursuant to my 14th Amendment right not to be deprived from liberty. Me. Without due process of law, which is why we're here for you to read Mr. Defendant his rights, Your Honor. Story 22. Framing animals for crimes. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm fairly certain that I could frame a dog for harm. A user replied, "Oh, I've framed animals before. I framed a raccoon for opening a Christmas present. And I framed a bear for eating out of the garbage." Story 23. Arguing laws without realizing different jurisdictions. In general, people arguing for an hour before realizing they live in different countries. Story 24. Sovereign citizen tax only on corporate self. Also, saw a sovereign citizen represent themselves in a tax evasion case, where they tried arguing something about the government only being able to tax his corporate self and not his personal self, so he had no obligation to pay taxes. Story 25. Lawyers should work for free, or equity share. That they had to pay me. This is more common than you'd think. For some reason, some people think lawyers are like their personal spiritual guides, or fairy godmother. Me. Sure, that will be $X. Them. Oh, we don't have any money. We want to work with people who will partner with us. We have an amazing idea. How about a percentage of the company? Me. Here is a referral. Story 26. Sobriety doesn't affect criminal liability. It doesn't matter if you were sober or not. You jumped out of a third-story window with a beer bottle and threw it at a cop. The jury is going to think you were drunk. Also, I think you were drunk. Story 27. Substance test positive from sexual contact. Client. So I don't smoke this particular substance. I think it's from unprotected intimacy. Me. So you would like me to explain to the judge it's okay. You just have relations with people who use that substance. Client. Yeah. Yesy, officer. She was smoking some of it before she started performing an act, and I figure she had some smoke left in her mouth, and she blew a bit into me by accident. Story 28. Double jeopardy applies to workplace accidents. Ryan, talking about Michael hitting an employee with his car. Did this happen on company property? Michael: yes. It was on company property with company property. So, double jeopardy. We are fine. Ryan: I don't think you understand how jeopardy works. Michael: oh, right. I'm sorry. What is we're fine? Story 29. Sue for bad weather on vacation. I was contacted by a couple who had paid for a trip to see the midnight sun in northern Norway. The weather was cloudy, so they didn't see the sun. They wanted to sue the travel agency for not getting what they paid for. Story 30. Cannot be fired for vehicular manslaughter on job. I went on a date with a lawyer recently who told me he had to be at work at 9 a.m. the next day to explain to someone that he could, in fact, be fired for causing the death of someone with the company vehicle. Story 31. Defendant wears crime outfit to court, takes plea deal. I was on a jury where the defendant showed up in court day one wearing the same exact outfit as the unknown suspect in the video of the crime. It took only a few seconds before the judge immediately called a stoppage. All lawyers went into the back with the judge, and they came out, like 7 minutes later, as announced the defendant had taken the plea deal. Wild. Story 32. Client leaves profane voicemails, faces contempt hearing. Client was being sued and didn't like the opposing counsel or the judge, so he left the court a bunch of voicemails so profane that he was subject to a criminal contempt of court hearing. Story 33. Defendant claims no domestic violence on public property. With the utmost certainty in his voice, he yelled at the arresting officer that, "It's not domestic violence. I'm on public property." You could tell from his face he really thought he had the cop over a barrel on this one, but... Story 34. Worker claims injuries, posts breakdance video online. Not my client, but the petitioner attorney's client. The man claimed workers' compensation and threw the kitchen sink at us, meaning he basically listed just over half of his body parts on the claim petition, stating that he injured each one. He was full of it, and my firm knew it. Anyways, we were going to trial, and the day before we ran one more social media search. This absolute complete moron posted a video of him winning a break dance competition that was only a few months after the alleged work incident. Never saw a quicker dismissal in my life. Story 35. Client steals batteries after bond, revokes freedom. Not an attorney, but one client of ours baffles me to this day. He had multiple cases, including aggravated battery and substance possession. At the insistence of dude's family, we moved heaven and earth getting him a bond, so that he could get out of jail and live with said family until the case was over. The whole process took weeks. Less than a day after getting out, he was caught stealing $16 worth of batteries from Target. Bond revoked. To be fair, the line between stupidity and compulsion is blurred with this one. Edit. For anyone who's curious, we immediately ordered a psychological evaluation for him. He was found competent, but it also confirmed what he had: mental health issues. The aggravated battery charge ended up being dropped, and he took a plea for time served. Story 36. Widower posts party photos, undermines wrongful death suit. My wife's lawyer bans all clients from using social media after he lost a big case. Wrongful death lawsuit where a man's wife was killed. Easy money. They were about to settle until the other side found his pictures online from a club, a week after his wife died, getting a lap dance wearing a shirt that said, "I love moms." Apparently they didn't think he had much pain and suffering anymore. Story 37. Client confesses trademark infringement online, loses case. I was defending a client who was accused of trademark infringement. Thought he knew better than the IP attorney assigned to his case, me, and so went on his company's website to defend himself by basically confessing to what he did and claiming it wasn't against the law, and the trademark owner was a woke baby who needed to either learn the law or get back in the kitchen and make her husband a sandwich. I wish I could say I was joking. I was one email away from negotiating a settlement that would have allowed the continued use of the complainant's mark, with limited restrictions and a very nominal fee. Little to say, she saw his website, told us to get lost, and dragged it before a judge. My client lost. Big. His lack of self-control cost him thousands of dollars. Story 38. Defendant testifies, undermines harm case with lies. Not an attorney, but I was in the jury for a 3-defendant harm trial. We sat through weeks of testimony, and from the sheer amount of direct evidence the state had, it was extraordinarily obvious very early on that Defendant 1 had committed the crime. Defendant 2, D1's brother, and Defendant 3, D1's girlfriend, were much less obvious, and we... Story 39. Client ignores advice, lies under oath in court. Had a client who was charged with a serious offense. We had a strong defense, but he insisted on testifying despite my advice against it. On the stand, he perjured himself so badly that the judge called a recess to laugh in chambers. Case lost. Client got maximum sentence. Story 40. Defendant posts evidence of crime on social media. Client accused of theft. Advised to stay off social media. Instead, he posted photos of the stolen items on Instagram, with captions bragging about his quote, squote, 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 squote. Opposing counsel used it in court, instant conviction. Story 41. Defendant claims stolen lottery tickets aren't valuable because they were losers. Former assistant state attorney/prosecutor here. This defendant is called up for arraignment, and the judge is telling him that he's been charged with theft for stealing a roll of scratch-off tickets from a gas station. The judge informs the defendant that since the value of the tickets was over $300, therefore it's a felony rather than a misdemeanor. The defendant says to the judge, "But, Your Honor, to be fair, the tickets were all losers," implying it's not theft at all. Story 42. Woman argues her Prius proves she wouldn't speed. Traffic court. Speeding ticket. Your Honor, I didn't speed, and I can prove it with logic. Lady, I drive a Prius. Lady, that proves I'm responsible. Specifically in the realm of cars. So I obviously wouldn't speed. She had to pay the ticket. Story 43. Old lady wants to sue herself for slipping on her own icy driveway. Personal injury prospect. Old lady slipped and fell on an icy driveway which was not salted or maintained, so she wanted to sue for damages. Turns out the lady fell on her own driveway which she did not salt/maintain. She was wanting to sue herself. Story 44. Defendant hands jacket with drugs to judge to prove illegal search. Law student. Former professor's story. Defendant busted for possession of narcotics. They were in the pocket of his leather jacket. He argues the search was illegal because with his buttery smooth leather jacket, there's no way the officer would have felt the substances in his pocket during a pat-down, so he shouldn't have reached in the pocket to find the substances in the first place. Judge asks if the jacket is the one he was currently wearing in court. It was. Judge asks to feel this jacket and the pockets. Defendant hands it to the bailiff. Judge finds more substances in the pocket. Story 45. Defendant admits guilt while pleading for bail. I was in the public gallery for this while studying law. Leeds Crown Court back in the early 90s. 75-year-old foreign man was facing a preliminary hearing relating to charges that he had sexually touched a 13-year-old relative. His barrister made a successful plea for bail based upon this man being an established pillar of the immigrant community, and the judge asked the old man if he had anything to say before he was bailed until the next hearing in a month. He made 2 comments. 1. She was wearing very, very tight shorts, and I should not be held responsible because no real man could resist see something like that. 2. I cannot reappear in a month because I am flying back to my home country tomorrow and will not be coming back. The judge ordered the defendant's passport seized, and he was remanded in custody until his trial. Story 46. Inmate lies about guard scar in molestation claim. I am a lawyer, had a female inmate claim she was molested by one of the guards. One of her most damning pieces of testimony was testifying to this large vertical scar he had on his chest from a heart operation. She continued to say that she remembered this huge scar from when he molested her. The guard got on the stand, took his shirt off, and he had a tiny horizontal scar up on his shoulder. Case over. He had apparently told her one time that he had surgery, and she assumed it would have left his giant scar and used that to make up her story. Story 47. Custody case requires child to friend mother on Facebook. Not a lawyer, but was the child in a custody case between my parents. My mother's lawyer argued for and had put in the final agreement that I had to add my mother as a Facebook friend. Story 48. Client asks lawyer to argue infidelity in divorce despite own cheating. This never made it to court. I asked my divorce lawyer what was the worst thing a client had asked him to argue. He had a client, a professor in his 50s, who wanted to argue that his wife's infidelity should be the grounds for divorce, and that he should get everything. The lawyer pointed out that the client had also cheated. The client replied, "But I'm a man." Story 51. Client confesses crime during fingerprinting. Friend of mine used to be a latent print analyst, going to get prints of a suspect arrested for breaking into a home to rob it. While she's getting the ink and paper set up, suspect shouts, "What do you need the prints for?" She looked right at me when I kicked in the door. Story 52. Client falls asleep during DUI video in court. Client charged with driving under the influence. Forced by police to give a urine sample on the side of a very busy interstate highway. Any sympathy the jury may have had for the defendant was lost, however, when he fell asleep during the playing of the video of the traffic stop. He had been out all night partying the night before trial. He was found guilty. Then he lied to the judge about what would be in his system during a substance test, and his sentence was doubled. Story 53. Client touches himself in court during arson trial. I have two stories that come to mind. One, a colleague of mine was representing an arsonist many years ago that had allegedly set quite a large fire that burned some public land. Due to the dollar cost of the damage, it was a felony. During the state's case in chief, he began touching himself. Recess had to be called. Funnily enough, that helped him in punishment phase, since there was clearly a mental component there. But still, big oof, and I don't know if what had been shown up to that point would have gotten a guilty. Story 54. Client introduces new fiancé in divorce court, violates prenup. I am not a lawyer, this isn't my story. But the lawyer who handled my business stuff and a legal dispute is a federal judge. Before he became a judge, he was a lawyer for divorces and civil stuff. A wealthy male client filed for divorce. There's a prenup. It's pretty ironclad. It excuses the distribution of wealth. The alimony, if any, is laid out at X amount, increasing yearly based on inflation. There's one major exception, and that is, if you are caught cheating. Cheating here is defined by any sexual contact with a person. Before the divorce is final, you automatically get the worst terms of the prenup. In the woman's case, if she cheats, she gets zero alimony and a one-time payment of $100K. In the man's case, if he cheats, he loses the main family home, all cars that are not his daily driver, and 1/4 of his business. A buyout option is available, but doesn't matter to this story. Lawyer gets to court and meets with his client in a conference room. And client is beaming. He shakes the lawyer's hand and says, "Hey, Robert, I want you to meet Jessica. I met her 2 months ago. She's amazing. We got engaged over the weekend in France." And Robert shook her hand and slumped in the chair and said, "So we got a major problem. You are cheating on our wife with her. And legally, this is discovery I am required to hand over to the other side." Has all. "How the heck am I cheating? We're separated?" Robert is all. "Cheating is any sexual contact before divorce is final. It's in our prenup. That you wrote on your own. The guy lost his temper. Ended up being so mad, he ditched court, which gave him a default judgment, meaning she gets everything she asked for. Plus, because of the cheating plus not showing up, the judge ordered that the transfer of money happen within 30 days, as part of the initial agreement between both parties. Hes not there to contest it, so blam. The guy ended up trying to sneak the company to the new woman via a trust, but it's an illegal move. He also tried to hide the money with her by giving her $1.1 million in cash, a bank transfer, but the judge stopped that once he found out and required the woman to repay the money since she was given notice also. He fought for years and ended up losing money, time, energy, his business, house, 6 to 7 cars, and his new wife. Now, 'cause I know his daughter from work, has a retired angry man living in rural New Mexico. He can't afford to golf more than once a month, and he posts about how women are scum. Story 55. Client smoked weed while driving to avoid kids. Smoke weed while driving home so she wouldn't smoke weed around the kids. Story 56. Client took felony plea over misdemeanor offer. Back when I was fairly new, I had a young man who insisted on taking a felony plea instead of the misdemeanor with active jail time, with work release. It took me ages to convince the prosecutor to offer. The young man had no prior criminal history, and no matter what I told him, he insisted he couldn't lose this new job he got. I told him there's no way to expunge a felony in Virginia. He is stuck with this for life. This is the worst decision he can ever make. I went over the consequences of being a felon so many times. I had my boss lecture him too, but ultimately, it's his life to mess up. He called me 6 months later, having lost the job and finding it difficult to find a new one, wondering if there was anything he could do to fix it. I said no, and to his credit, he acknowledged that I did tell him that. On the plus side, his story has stopped every subsequent client from making the same mistake. Story 57. Client added family to deed, caused divorce issues. Put her son and daughter-in-law on her deed so she could avoid probate when she died. For reference, probate in our state is not that big a deal. There is no estate tax. She did this against my explicit recommendations. She assured me that it would never become an issue because her son and daughter-in-law would be married forever. You can guess what happened next. Less than 2 years later, she ended up selling her retirement home because half of it was considered marital property and her son's divorce. Story 58. Client tried to bribe witness during trial. Second day of trial, other side's star witness is giving testimony. The next day, opposing counsel comes in to court, and we all have a discussion about how my client attempted to bribe the witness to not come back over Facebook Messenger. Story 59. Client confessed substance debt in police interview. Police interview for assault. The police already disclosed that they didn't view the matter as serious, and they would do a quick interview with my client and deal with it via a fixed penalty. Interview went like this. Officer, why did you hit him? My client, he owes me money for substances. Story 60. Client tore up brother's check in public. Took his brother's check for his distribution from their mother's probate estate to his place of work and handed it to him, had him sign a receipt, and then snatched the check back and tore into little pieces in front of a dozen of his brother's co-workers. The receipt's still good, right? Story 61. Misunderstanding free speech at work. It's only the government that isn't allowed to suppress free speech, and even then there are many exceptions. An employer, or any other private entity, is allowed to censor almost any speech they want. Story 62. Thinking porn solves prostitution laws. Prostitution is illegal, but pornography is legal. If you want to hire a prostitute, all you have to do is instead offer to pay her to have intimacy with you on camera. Now you're making porn, which is legal. Story 63. Miranda rights as instant freedom. If you aren't read your Miranda warning, you can't be convicted. The police have to read you your rights the instant they handcuff you. Story 64. Selling house for $1 in divorce. Just sell your house to your sister for $1 and then you won't have a house. Really stupid divorce advice. Story 65. Kids can choose parents at 13. Happens every time little Johnny is 13, so he can choose what parent he wants to live with. Biggest line of nonsense I ever heard. Story 66. Talking to police is safe advice. Just be honest and tell them what you know. If you're innocent, there shouldn't be a problem. In reality, keep your mouth shut till your attorney arrives. Story 67. Non-profit use exempts copyright laws. Someone said that you can't be sued if you use trademarked or copyrighted material for non-profit open-source projects. That is incorrect. Story 68. IRS isn't legal, no taxes needed. That the IRS isn't legal and you have no duty to pay your taxes. It is legal and you will pay. Story 69. Locked car means no warrant needed. Glove compartment is locked, so is the trunk in the back. I know my rights, so you're gonna need a warrant for that. You don't need a warrant for that. Story 70. Modified gun means prison time. Not a lawyer, but the idea that modifying a firearm will get you sent to prison if you have to use it, because it shows you were looking to harm someone. Absolute nonsense. If it was a justifiable shoot, it doesn't really matter what you've done to your gun, you were legally justified in shooting them. Story 71. Substance cook seeks 24-hour release for wedding. I'm a lawyer. The most ridiculous argument I've seen was one I actually made. One of my clients got busted cooking a substance. This was a very clear-cut case. They actually caught him in the middle of a cook. No way he was getting out of this one. Even worse, he was cooking at home and children were there. Yep, the district attorney loaded him up with felonies, there was no bail, and he was being held in the county jail. My client knew he was in deep trouble. He had been planning to get married a few weeks after he got busted. My client asks me if he can get released for 24 hours so he can still get married. I tell him that I'll ask, but that there's no way in heck they'll let him out. First, I ask the district attorney if they will allow it. Nope, they laugh. So I file a motion with the court. Now, I knew the judge was a crusty old conservative family values kind of guy, who also has a raging erection for substance crime. There was no law involved, but I put together an argument about the sanctity of marriage and how the state should encourage marriage at all times, and that sort of thing. We have a hearing, and I make the argument the district attorney is totally opposed and calls it ridiculous, and the judge grants it. The judge actually decided to allow my client out for 24 hours to get married. He had to surrender at the county jail at 8 a.m. the next day and some other conditions, but still, he was allowed out. Everyone is stunned. Nobody can believe it. The day of the wedding comes. My client gets out, gets married, then goes back to the jail. Everything went exactly like how it was supposed to, which is also pretty shocking. Story 73. Opposing counsel objects to their own document. Ha! I'm a lawyer. I should win right there. Anyway, we were in trial, and opposing counsel was objecting to a document I was trying to enter into evidence through one of their witnesses. The witness had identified it as one of their business records, but opposing counsel objects. Jury is in the courtroom, so the judge has us approach. We do, and opposing counsel argues the authenticity of the document. Your Honor, this is their exhibit. Is counsel stating they submitted inauthentic documents to this court? Judge turns to counsel. Are you submitting non-authentic documents? Opposing counsel stammers out a no, and the document goes in. I was a little surprised they wanted to argue their own document wasn't authentic just to keep me from getting it to the jury. Story 74. Police report alone proves probable cause. I am a lawyer. The state tried to argue that probable cause exists simply because there is a police report alleging the crime. From the fact that a police officer filed this report, it is a reasonable inference that the crime took place as described. Good. Allegations are self-proving now. Well, wrap up court then. I guess no need to hear any more motions to dismiss ever. I wonder why no other prosecutor in 240 years of jurisprudence ever thought of that before. 25 years old assistant district attorney who went to the worst law school in this state. Story 75. Clown funeral forces family compliance. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but I heard this story from a woman who used to work at a funeral parlor. Apparently there was this rich old broad from here on out, and her family had been waiting for her to die for a bunch of years so they could get her money. Real stuck-up, awful people, and rich old broad hated them. But I guess she either didn't have anyone else to leave her money to, or she figured that her awful family would contest the will if everything wasn't left to them. Knowing how status-conscious these awful relatives are, rich old broad decided, fine, they can have the stupid money, but I'm going to make them suffer for it. So when rich old broad finally passes away, her lawyer approaches the family with her instructions for how her funeral is to be run. According to rich old broad's will, the only way they get the money is if they follow these instructions to the letter. I don't remember all the absurd details in her instructions. Been a few years since I heard the story. Except for the piece de resistance. Rich old broad required an open casket funeral, with all family members in attendance, and demanded that her corpse be dressed up like Bozo the Clown. Makeup, red nose, crazy hair, massive shoes, the works. The family tried to protest, but rich old broad's lawyer had tied this thing up beautifully. Perfectly ironclad. They either attended the Bozo the Clown funeral, or they don't get a dime, so they did it. These stuck-up people had to stand there for hours, glowering, taking weird looks from all their friends and neighbors as people got close to the casket and realized rich old broad was dressed like a clown. According to funeral parlor employee who had dressed rich old broad and applied the makeup, the best part of the service came when they tried to shut the casket, and couldn't, because the massive shoes got in the way. They had to bend these 24-inch shoes in half to get the lid closed. I never had the honor of meeting the brilliant, cantankerous old lady, but she's one of my biggest heroes. Too long, didn't read. If you want to close a casket when the corpse is wearing clown shoes, you have to bend the shoes in half. Story 76. Millionaire leaves kids $35 yearly interest. My mom only works for crazy rich people. The worst will she ever told me about was this old guy who was close to 90. He wanted it so that when he dies, all of his millions will go into a trust for his kids, and his kids will never be able to touch it, but they can collect the interest it generates. So he had my mom set him up with this group of accountants who will manage the trust, and he specifically arranged a plan with them to manage the account in such a way that their yearly billing will almost exactly match the interest to be made. So when he dies, his kids will inherit millions but will only be able to spend like $35 a year from it. $35 that the kids have to split between them. Story 77. Ferrets inherit all property. Shocking sons. Filthy rich man was the owner of 2 pet ferrets at the time of his death. He really loved these ferrets, and wanted to ensure that these ferrets were taken care of when he passed, and so informed his sons that the ferrets were to receive all his property. Story 78. Grandmother demands push-up bra and casket. Upon her death, we read the will of my grandma, a very serious lady, that she had to be wearing a push-up bra if there was an open casket. Story 79. Ashes baked into bread for inheritance. My dad teases my brother and I that his will has a stipulation that he be cremated and his ashes baked into a loaf of bread, and that my brother and I have to eat said loaf of bread to qualify for any inheritance. The scary thing is my dad is a lawyer who writes wills. Story 80. 3-year-old gets half estate, control. My since passed aunt and uncle, wrote up a will right before my uncle died. They had a 3-year-old son at the time. They left him half of the estate and put him in charge of the trust. So this kid had control over millions of dollars at 3 years old. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education.